Okay, so once you finish the week 1 attendance, then you'll get the next video, which you're watching now. So I'm assuming you're here. Good assumption. Although, by the way, I do have a YouTube channel. You could always check out videos as well. So the one thing I want to say before we move into this item is notice how, as I'd said before, all of these items have to be complete and in sequence. And notice how the first two are on the 12th of the month, 12th of August, and the next two are on the 15th. Remember, you can always use the calendar to look at the due dates for the class as well. But the other thing about this is that on the attendance, when you hit reply there, everyone can see it. You're contributing to a discussion board, and that's this little icon here. The next three items are where you're going to submit only between you and I. You're going to submit an item, and I'll show you how to submit that in this video. Okay, so what I'm going to go over here is the idea of taking notes and version control. So I mentioned version control before, and it is a very important part of our class. And GitHub is the website that we use to save our work for this class, and it's where we submit our work for this class, okay? But Git is the underlining version control software that we're using. So GitHub is a website, and Git is software that we use to track our changes. Okay, you'll see this as we move forward. So what I want you to do is now open up that code space. Matter of fact, I realized here I needed to actually, I shouldn't assume you have it already open, so let's walk through it and then I'll modify the instruction. So under our CIT28 repository, under my private repo, I'll go back into code and I'll come in here, which by the way, you could actually save this URL. I think it should allow you to come back into it, but typically I would recommend doing what I showed before, which is once you're done with it, and you're going to learn today a new step of this, which is doing work in your code space. Again, think of this as a separate, just a computer that's set up on the internet, on the cloud, just for you, but you'll then push your code, and that's a term you'll learn today, back into this location so that you can submit it. So I know when you first do this it can be a little confusing, so we'll step through it piece by piece. So I'm going to go ahead and click into here, and because I stopped it, it's going to set up my system, and it's going to take it a few minutes because this is where it's spinning up. This is a common term when we talk about this idea of a virtualized computer, because this is not one particular computer, this is a group of them that are on the cloud, but in this case we have our little version of the cloud that we're using. Okay, so in here we see the two files we already created, that VS Code file in here, and if you don't see it, I'm going to show you about the terminal in a minute, but if you don't see it, which you might not, and you might see some other content here, and that's okay, right? But I can just tell you that oftentimes we're going to be using the terminal, and so there's various ways to get in here. You can come in here and you can just say new terminal. So if you come in here and you're like, I don't see this part of what Rio's looking at, don't worry about it. At the end of this video we're actually going to talk about the terminal a little bit, and actually even before then. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close this file. And by the way, this is also true. I'm going to show you about markup. We're going to talk about Markdown today in a little more detail as well. But first, what I'm going to have you do, and I'm going to flip back over here, is I'm going to have you create a new folder in your private repo, in your code space, called W1. And inside that, create a new file named setup.md. Okay, so let's do that. So this is where it can get a little bit tricky, because if you, well, I'm just going to show you, as you create folders, multiple folders, this gets a little more tricky. When you don't have any or you just have files, it's a little easier. But if you roll your mouse over, you will see that this is a new file and this is a new folder. Okay, now I told you before, like, repos are kind of like folders. They are, but they have this special connection between this location on the code space, right? And this location on, oh, sorry, on GitHub. And you'll see that as we go through. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. And when you do that, it's going to be a subfolder under that private repo name, okay? And we're going to call it W1, okay? And hit enter. Now, if you accidentally hit file here, that's okay. You can actually remove it. You don't, because you can't rename it to, right, if you created a file versus a folder. And the way you know it's a folder, and let me make this bigger so you can see it, is notice how it has this little caret here. Now I don't have anything. As a matter of fact, you can see these two files are at the same level. So here, what I'm going to do is now, this is what I was saying, we're going to create a new file called setup.md. So let's do that. So making sure we're highlighted into our week 1. Now we create a file, and we call it setup.md. Now MD is for a markdown file. Now you don't want to put a space. It actually even tells you not to put a space there, which is cool. And it gives you a little icon indicating, in this case, that this interface, which is VS Code in an editor, knows what kind of file. Oh, how about set up? How about that? How about I spell that right? Okay, setup.md. So, and by the way, if you named it, I could show you how to rename it, but let's just hit enter, and then it creates that file, and then notice how that is now green. And notice, if you didn't before, that this says 1. That means we have our first change inside of our code space that is being tracked. Okay, now I'm sorry, it's not being tracked yet, but we have a change. And if we came over here, we'd say, oh, okay, we have a change, we have a new file set up. But I'm going to end up teaching you, and I'm going to come back to here, how to use this terminal to handle our version control. Okay, so again, this is where we're going to end up with today. But before we do that, let's go ahead and click in the markdown file. And so if you've heard of HTML markup, the most common thing, everything you look at on the web is HTML structure, CSS is the style, some kind of programming language is the intelligence. But HTML, there is a version called Markdown, so instead of markup, and it just gives us a quicker way to format documents. And it's very common in this course and very common in the industry that you're looking to get in, that you will see these markdown files formatted. So let's go ahead and play around with this. So now I'm going to go back to my code space. And in my file, I'm actually going to bring this down just for a minute, right? And in my, because it gives me my line 1, and I could put pound, and I could put heading 1. And now in this case, we're looking at the syntax of Markdown. Okay, so this is the syntax itself. If we wanted to look at the output, then we could come over here, and there's a couple of icons. Notice over here, we can open the preview, we can open the changes side by side, split the editor, but let's actually do a preview. I think this is the one we want. And if I click on that, then I get the preview of what this markdown is actually doing in the file. So if I do 2 of those and be a heading 2. Okay, so if I bet you're guessing where I'm going, heading 3. Okay? Okay, so these are just a way we can, of course, you're probably familiar with this, create outlines. We have headings, and then within headings we could have outlines, right? So in here, right, and if we go back to our cheat sheet, we can do bold, we can do italics, we can do block quotes, but very commonly we'd do what's called ordered lists, numbers, and unordered lists with just dashes. And then we can do links and other things as well. Okay, so let's do a ordered list. So how would we do that? We'd put 1. Okay, so let's do that. So we put 1 period. You know, I could put tab, and I'd say first thing to learn today. Cool. And then I could do 2. Second thing to learn today. Now, notice something interesting, right? Even though I have different spacing here, the way it renders is actually the way it should. And so what that says is the white space gets ignored when you use this markdown syntax, which is kind of what you want. So now under here, let's do a dash. And let's say I need to work out today. Dash, right? Another dash. I need to get to work today. It's not very, okay. But then we can mix and match these things, okay? So we could come up here. Let's see what would happen if under this one we put a dash, okay? So what that would do is then put that in line. Let's see, feed the dog, okay? So interestingly enough, notice what happens. It actually doesn't look like it's outlined. It just looks like another item in there. And so if we came back over here, I don't think they actually talk about it. They give us a bit more description. Yeah, we can do task lists, but they don't actually tell us. I'm just going to play around to kind of figure out what I'm trying to do here. Let's see if sometimes if I tab, yeah, so in this case, because I hit a tab before the markdown syntax itself, it did move it over, right? So if I did it here, right, what would happen here? Oh yeah, so then it would be like, oh, it's out of the line, out of the what we call the render path. But and this is just something that you learn. Typically what you're doing is headings and you're doing this, and then you could just be doing plain old text. By the way, you should be following along and seeing this, you know, it doesn't have to be exactly like mine, but having this idea of a heading, one, a heading, two, an ordered list, then an unordered list within there indented. Like if we came over here and let's say I did one, okay, what would that do? Hello? Yeah, so that would then place it in the outline itself. Okay, so always good to have this cheat sheet around. I give you a link here. You can always come back to it, right? So, but what I want to do is jump over this and talk about the importance of commits. We saw commits in our attendance video, but we're actually going to do a commit here. Okay, I'm actually going to give you a specific commit. I've just given you the examples here, but now we're going to learn about the terminal. Okay, so now let's start learning how to use our terminal. So back at our code space, notice how before I'd shown you, and I'm going to just kind of make this a little less so I can see both. Right, so now I have my terminal. Again, if you don't see the terminal, you can go down to terminal and do new terminal. There's multiple kinds of terminals. Okay, this will also be a little based on your particular computer that you're on. So I don't think ZSH would show up on a Windows computer, but I could be fooled. But we're going to typically use Bash, and that's because Bash is associated with GitHub. Okay. So when we, and I'm just going to, and notice how I have multiples here, so I could hit trash and I could hit trash to make it go away. So I just stop those terminals, and I could always learn the keyboard shortcuts or just go back down to terminal and go, okay. So in this case for a Mac, it'd be Control, Shift, and then the tick to get it back. Okay, but I could just click it as well. So notice what happens. A couple things like I talked about before. So now we've created a file, we've made changes to that file. And so now what we're learning to do is the workflow of actually saving that file to our code space and eventually into our GitHub. Okay? So what I want to show you here is when you have this, it defaults into the code space directory that is, and then your repo name. So if once you get this, if you type git status, it basically is showing you a text version of what this is kind of showing you. I recommend students learn the command line because it is important to understand. Over time, the more things, the more tech training you get, the more it's good to have your command line experience. Okay, so in this case it's saying we have some untracked files. Okay, so untracked means we have a new file, but we haven't actually started tracking it over time. So what we want to do, and this is the second command, is we're going to do, and now in this case I was saying if you change into the folder, but in our case it actually is already there, so we don't have to worry so much about this. This may come into account later and we'll talk about that. So now we're going to stage this change to our local repo. So let's do that. Staging basically says, hey, this is a file I want to track. So let's do git add, and I could say the actual file name, but notice before I do that, I'm going to do ls, okay, which is a list files, okay, because notice, and I should have said this when we were looking at it, but notice how my current directory, and this is another command, pwd, and this already showed us this before, is in my repo, but I created a folder. But I think this command we're about to do will actually look down into the folder, so let's just play and see. Okay, I'm going to say, I'm actually going to do a clear. Okay, clear command, I did that real quick. Clears whatever else you had in there before. And don't worry if you're like, oh, I didn't see what she did, because I'm about to show you the actual command again. So git status will show us the status of what our version control needs to do, right? And so now we're going to do git add star, okay? And when we do that, it actually reaches into that subfolder, in this case subfolder under here, and it changes this to A. So now this is the index was added. So now we have, if we do git status again, now we have a new file. So now we've said, okay, that file is now in our staging area. Okay, so that's the first step along the process. And you might wonder, why do we have to do all these steps? It's because version control is really important to know all the stages of your code as it moves through time, because code will change. We code things and that code then becomes the new version of what we've done. Okay, so now let's do the next command. So now we've done the git add, and I've just given you some more information that you can also, and I should get rid of this because this indicates the prompt. But I can tell you could also add the specific file name if you wanted to. This is a wildcard. Wildcard would say if I had created multiple files, which you will do in some assignments, then whenever I do a git add, it's just going to add all of those files. So you can either do wildcard or you can do a specific file name. Okay? So now we're actually going to commit these changes into the local repo. So we've looked at the status, we've added them into our local area, we've added them for tracking. Okay, we've staged them, and now we're going to commit them. Okay, so let's do that. So now, and this is also going to change the color and the status of the file. So git, okay, commit -m space forward, double quotes, and we'll say my first commit. It may not be, but just for our setup here it is. So this is important, is for you to do exactly as I've done here, which is the command git space commit space -m open quote my first commit close quote. Okay, and this again, you're going to learn this over time, and it'll become second nature in about a week or so, maybe sooner. So now what have we done? Notice how our color now is back to its standard color. Our this is gone, our 1 in here is gone. If I do git status, then it's going to say, hey, nothing to commit, because we've already changed that, right? Okay, so the last command we're going to learn today before we move on and talk about other things we're going to do in the terminal is called git push. Now this is where you're really going to see, and that's why I'm going to open up the 28 repo, or the organization in GitHub. I'm going to bring up, because notice as we've changed in our GitHub repo, those changes are not in here yet. And that's because they only exist in this workspace. Okay? In this code space. So this last command we're about to do is going to then push it into here so that you can submit it. All right, so we're getting really close to the end of this assignment. So let's go ahead and do this last couple of steps. So let's do git push. And so now, whatever we've been tracking, we've only made one commit. We'll do a git push. It'll give you some content, and if everything worked okay, you'll get something like this. But the other way you can see if this worked is you go over to your repo up on GitHub, you hit refresh, and you should see that W1. If you click into W1, you will see that setup file that shows that little bit of work that we did today. Okay? And that's what you're going to be doing when I say take notes, because sometimes you're going to be doing commands, sometimes you're going to be doing notes, right? So I want to show you this now because it also teaches you how to do the Git work, what we call the Git workflow, right? So we modify files. Oh, that's one thing I forgot to talk about, which I think is set up already. So let me check this out. One thing is you change files. I think VS Code actually has it set up to automatically save. Yeah, mine is, and I think yours probably as well. But if for some reason, and I should have said this earlier, so if this threw you off, I apologize. But if I didn't have that turned on, I would get a little dot on my file indicating I had changed it. Okay, and just, you don't have to do it, but let me just show you in case you run into this. If I turned auto save off and I did new content here, notice how that actually is a little dot because it hasn't been saved. And before you do the Git workflow, right, you have to actually save the file like we're used to in the normal world, I guess, of saving things. Because notice how in this case the change indicator, and if I do, let me do a clear, if I do git status here, it's not going to tell me I have anything that's new because I haven't saved the file. And that's why having this auto save just takes care of that for you. So if for some reason you didn't have it, now I see, oh, I do have a change. And now when I do git status, okay, I say, oh yeah, okay, so we've already staged this file, right? So all we'd have to do is now when we do git add, it's going to add just the change. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and do that again. I'm going to do clear. Okay, so now we're going to add just this one line, right? Just this one line. I'm going to show you the difference now because this is also leading to how you submit. So let's do git add star. Right? Now it's modified. So again, once it's tracked, right? First time it's created, it's green, right? Then when we track it, what color did it turn? I don't remember. And then it turns yellow once we have updated it, once we're start tracking it. Okay, so now we'll do git commit -m second commit. Okay. Now again, this file has not been pushed yet to GitHub, so we don't see it here, right? I mean, we see the file, but we don't see that last bit of new content. Okay. So let's come back over here. So then the last command is git push. Excellent, right? So boom. And now if we refresh, we will see, oh, now look, that's interesting, is that we'd have to talk about how do we then create new lines. And we can look at that later, but more than anything, I wanted you to get the idea of how to do the workflow. Okay, now let's say you make an error. Right? What you can do is just do another commit. There is ways to roll back things, but we're not going to worry about that for now because it's just as you use Git and GitHub more, you learn about how to take care of this stuff. Okay, nothing we need to do here, but one thing I do want to show you before we submit. Okay, so over in our code space, I'm going to bring, because we're preparing for the next assignment, so I'm going to clear this. I'm going to close this, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to bring this all the way up, okay, to where it covers. Now you can play with this and you can bring it down and bring it up just to see that it can do both. But in the next assignment, you're going to start writing SQL-like commands. So I just want to show you right now just that SQL. If I do, because you could just type SQLite 3 at the command line, and when you hit enter, you end up moving into the SQLite command environment, or the software to interface with SQLite. And I'll talk more about SQLite in the next assignment. But in this case, we'll learn how to open a file when we call this. But in this case, I think it's Control L. Where is it? I had to play with this. Oh yeah, so if you're and in this case, we're still in SQLite. I think it was Control C. Yeah, so, and this says we're continuing. So if you don't remember, like, how do I get out of SQLite and get back to Bash? There's actually, and notice how this actually changes to SQLite as well. That's kind of cool. I mean, one thing I could do, and I typically wouldn't, if I was in the middle of something, I could kill it. But I could also just go over if I didn't remember it, and I would say, how, and this is just Google, and you could ask ChatGPT as well, is how to stop, how to end SQLite 3. I think it's session. Let's see if it's session. Control D to end. I thought I did Control D. Let's try that again. Control D. There was. I guess I didn't try it. Okay. So this sent us back to the bash. Okay. And this is something, again, we're going to get used to doing as we move through things. So you can either keep this as it is, because a lot of all of what we're going to do in the next two assignments, actually not everything, because we're going to take a few notes first, and then we'll do some SQLite after that. All right, let's end with showing you two things. One thing that's not new, because we haven't changed anything. Everything on our code space is actually in our GitHub repo, which is awesome. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and stop my code space. I'm going to go ahead and hit X here. I'm going to come over to here. I'm going to go ahead and stop it, because for now I'm done with it. I'm going to say end, stop my code space, so it's not hanging out there taking up hours, because there is a limited number of hours those things can be used. But now we're going to prepare for the last step, which is how to submit this assignment. Okay, so here we're going to come up, I've opened it up, and this is going to require you to give me a URL. Okay, so this is great to understand, is that if I'm in my private repo, I see we've done 4 commits. Okay, and if I look at this URL, it's going to give me just the repo listing, but typically what I want to see when you submit work is your commit history. So if you click on your commit history, which is right under your green button for code, hit this, then it shows you all the commits that you've done, and you can actually see that last one shows you that we added new content. Okay, I must have actually gotten through and reformatted that one as well. So the green means new content. It actually deleted the old one. I must have just played around. I don't even remember what I did with that. But you get the idea, hopefully. And look at your other commits, like your first commit. That's all. Green means that's all the stuff that was added. Okay, but let's come back here. Right, come back here. I'm going to actually take you back, because I'm going to show you one more time. We're going to hit 4 commits, because this is the way you come up here, right? And actually, I'm going to show you one other way. Should have done this before. I'm going to do W1. And now when I do commit history, right, it's actually going to show me only the 2 commits for this W1. And this is actually the way you'll submit. So it's just good to know the difference, because when I was on the repo, and there were 4 commits when I did commit history, this is what we did when we set up the initial repo, and that was on the what we call the root of the repo. But these were done specifically in this W1 folder. So I click into here first, I go over to my history, and this is the URL you will submit to me for grading. Okay, so make sure you have it looking this way. Come into here, commit, and then do submit, and then that gives you the submission for your next assignment. So we'll move on to the next one. I hope that was helpful. Reach out if you need any help.